Hello. Good evening. Good evening. My name is Peter Christian Eigner. I'm the director of the Gotham Center for New York City History. It's my pleasure to welcome you all here this evening, and thank you so much for coming. Just get my notes out. Normally here at the Gotham Center, we feature authors with especially interesting new work at the history of New York City. We're doing something different. We have an author with an especially interesting new book that takes place almost entirely outside the five boroughs. But the reasons for that, I think, probably don't need much explanation. If the Statue of Liberty has come to be the premier symbol of America's identity as a democracy welcoming the immigrant poor, it is also almost unimaginable in any other city than New York, which of course has been the nation's first home to so many different immigrant groups and the cradle for so many of the developments that expanded democracy here in America. In these times when so many New Yorkers are questioning what they thought they knew about their country and their city, it is also perhaps especially fitting to feature a work that challenges what we think we know about this icon, which has come to so represent both. The sculptor who created the Statue of Liberty, Auguste Bartholdi, came to New York in the early 1870s, representing a group of moderate Democrats in France who were hoping to establish a Republican system like America's. A year before he completed the statue, Bartholdi told North American Review, the premier intellectual magazine of the day, that it was the leader of this group, Edouard, and I'm gonna totally destroy this name here, Laboulaye. Perfect, okay, great. Edouard Laboulaye, who came up with the idea, looking for a symbol that would honor the push for democracy in both countries. Dead for 2 years, Laboulaye could neither confirm nor deny the statement. So most historians have been forced to rely upon Bartholdi's version of the events, which has in turn become the popular understanding. Our speaker here tonight is here to complicate that narrative, using new research on Bartholdi and Laboulaye that gives us a view to the statue's prehistory with its mix of contradictory and surprising values. So without further ado, I want to introduce our speaker, Francesca Lidia Viano, a historian of European-American relations in the 18th and 19th century, who describes her main interests as bringing to light the transnational exchanges that generated some of America's most iconic symbols and institutions. Here in Sentinel, The Unlikely History of the Statue of Liberty, recently published by Harvard University Press, she follows the ideological and material construction of the Statue of Liberty from France to Egypt and America, from the east to the west, and from the east to the west to challenge established theories of cultural communication and cultural appropriation. In previous work, she has explored reciprocal representations of Europe and America through authors such as the Norwegian-American sociologist, Thorstein Veblen, and the British politician, James Bryce. Her current project focuses on the origins of the United States in light of the Federalist Party's engagement with the world. She received 2 PhDs, one from the University of Perugia in Italy, and the second from King's College at the University of Cambridge. She is presently a fellow at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs at Harvard University, and it is my esteemed pleasure to welcome her here tonight. Please join me in welcoming our speaker.
Thank you, Peter, for a flattering introduction. Thank you to the Gotham Center for making this event possible. Well, on a stage which was not much bigger than this room, 150 years ago, the Statue of Liberty was formally presented to the Parisian public. Of course, the statue was not there. There was no money to build it. But the presenters of the statues, the architect Frédéric Auguste Bartholdi, who you see here in his military attire, one of his most favorite attires, and his friend and collaborator, Édouard René de Laboulaye, a political scientist, but also a businessman. He directed a factory for the production of typing characters. So he worked for a long time in the publishing business, in the publishing industry. So these two men were full of resources. And on that night, in 1867, they brought to theater a huge transparency of the statue. They put a light behind the transparency, and the statue came to life. Imagine in the background an old scene from Shakespeare's Hamlet, a creepy castle from Denmark, and the statue seemed to escape like a ghost from this castle. In the middle of the stage, there was a throne. The throne came from Donizetti's La Favorite, and on the throne was sitting Édouard de la Boulaye. He was older, it had white hair, all loose on his shoulders. He was wearing a long black tunic and a white collar. Now, the reason I'm bringing you back in time is that, for once, I wanted to stress my theatrical awkwardness, which is undeniable. And the second reason is that most of the myths that are coming out in the media in these days have been fabricated, created by these two men, Bartholdi and La Boulaye, together, inside a theatrical setting, by using theatrical techniques. One of the myths I would like to discuss with you tonight was brought to light by President Trump's campaign to build a wall. Recently, in his objection to this campaign, Senator Chuck Schumer said, the symbol of America should be the Statue of Liberty, not a 30-foot wall. Well, we all know that the Statue of Liberty is a powerful symbol of social and ethnic integration. It is, but when did she become such a symbol? The common saying today is that she became a symbol of integration after Emma Lazarus's The New Colossus was exposed inside the statue in 1903. The poem, the sonnet says, you know, from a hand glows a worldwide welcome, sweet eyes speak to the immigrant poor, to the wretched from Europe. Well, when my son, who is sitting in front row here, sees me with this face, he knows that he should keep away for a little while. And for all we know, given that expression, the statue could very well be saying, "It is dark in here, bring light." Or why not? Go back, which is something suggested by recent cartoons making fun of President Trump's policy of segregation and exclusion. Well, I'm not here tonight to decide who is right or who is wrong. I wouldn't be able. But I'm here tonight to attract your attention to a single fact. The statue started to draw minorities, sympathetic minorities, even before Emma Lazarus' poem was framed inside the statue. Indeed, Emma Lazarus herself wrote the poem in 1883, even before the statue was finished in France, certainly before it was moved to America. Emma Goldman, the Russian immigrant, arrived in 1885. The statue was being assembled in Liberty Island, then Bedloe Island, and she said, the statue for me was a symbol of hope, of freedom, of opportunity. Well, you might be saying, yes, you know, these people read what newspapers said at the time. And, you know, the famous journalist Pulitzer gathered much funding just saying that the Statue of Liberty was a people's statue. Well, this might be right, but then fast forward in 1886, October 28th, 1886, the statue was formally inaugurated. A group of suffragists, around 14, 15, followed the parade up to the Battery, down Fifth Avenue. At the Battery, the public parade was over. Only a selected number of people could sail to Liberty Island and listen to a selected number of talks given only by men at the feet of the statue. Well, the suffragists boarded a boat, sailed to Liberty Island, and despite the wind and the rain, they shouted all their despise to the government, which showed a huge statue of liberty without having been able to guarantee liberty to most of the population. But they said something else, which I think is worth noticing. They said the statue is not the symbol of what America has achieved. The statue is not the watch and word of America, like President Cleveland said on that very day. The statue is a symbol of what all righteous men and women of the country are still striving to achieve. So the statue is not the symbol of what has been achieved. The statue is a symbol of what is going to be achieved. So the statue represents a margin, a huge margin between what has been done and what will be done. When I read this passage from the suffragist speech, I thought of Henry James. In 1904, Henry James wrote a novel, which is not very well known, it's The American Scene, and he said, there is something typically American about the gap between what has been achieved and what can or could be achieved. We need something to shed light on this margin, a flare, said Henry James. So, of course, the statue grew to be such a flare. But was she meant to be a flare when this flare when she was born? One way to answer this question is to go back again to 1876, when the statue was introduced to the Parisian public. At that point, Bartholdi and Laboulaye wrote a document which was published on all Parisian newspapers and some American newspapers. They said many things in this document, but the gist was the following. In the middle of the harbor, New York, on an island that belongs to the Union of the States, in front of Long Island, where the first blood was shed for independence, a colossal statue will rise up. So there is no mention of future. There is no mention of the wretched poor or the immigrants. The statue is simply a war memorial, is an historical document, right? If you want, it's a mausoleum of the unknown soldiers, French and Americans, who died to protect America from the British. So this was the first omission. The second omission, of course, was about Bartholdi, the sculptor of the statue. Not many knew who Bartholdi was at the time. We know that Bartholdi is the architect of the Statue of Liberty, but Bartholdi was not an architect. He became a sculptor, but he was a painter. He was a disciple of Henri Scheffer, a Dutch painter of French origins. Scheffer, you see here, I love this painting because Scheffer is posing with this red coat. He was an admirer of Garibaldi. He was a friend of many expatriates who had fought in Greece to gain national independence. He was a political painter. He was also known for very erotic painters, such as this Paolo Francesca from 1835. And he was known for more severe paintings of religious topics, such as Christus Remunerator, which will eventually inspire the Statue of Liberty. But he was also known for bizarre combinations of the two, such as this heavenly and earthly love of 1850. Finally, he was a friend of many landscape painters who had immense influence on Bartholdi while he was hanging out in Henri Scheffer's atelier. So, not surprisingly, Bartholdi came to master the art of color in ways that we are not aware of right now. And he traveled. He was an itinerant painter. He traveled and he painted and he sculptured, but his main inspiration came from his travels. So from his paintings, you can see he traveled through France, he went to Britain, and of course, as you know, he went to America. By the time he went to America in 1870, he was already a photographer. He was a brilliant photographer. He took photos of the Niagara Falls, of the Californian giant sequoias. He loved American cities, but he was mostly attracted by American wild landscapes. The experience, however, that shaped the most his art was in Egypt and Middle East. Bartholdi was only 21 when he boarded a ship in Marseille and he sailed to Cairo. He was not alone. He was with a senior colleague, Jean-Léon Gérôme, an Orientalist painter. He had an immense influence on Bartholdi. As you can see, both of them they pretended to be Orientals. They were Orientalists, and the distinction here is crucial, because as Said said, these people, and particularly Jean-Léon Gérôme, used his artistic description to take possession of the East. These are examples of what Jean-Léon Gérôme could do with his Orientalistic imagination. He made huge paintings with naked women to sell to businessmen at high prices. So he went to the Orient, as he called it, to make money. Bartholdi was more naive, and he certainly was more of an hard worker than Gérôme. Both of them had to get some money for the expedition, so they decided to say to the public authorities that the expedition was an ethnological expedition. So they wanted to learn how to paint and sketch not Caucasian faces, as we would say today. They wanted to learn to paint people from different ethnicities. Gérôme took the job less seriously than Bartholdi, who started to check and paint every face, basically, he saw in Egypt. Instead of going to the pyramids, he went there. He left a little graffiti, and then that was it for him. He was no longer interested in the pyramid. I've not looked for the graffiti, but if any of you is interested, it must still be there. So he went up the course of the Nile, and he stopped in every market, and in the markets, he would draw and sketch these faces, mostly men, sometimes women. His reason for not sketching women was that women moved too much. But apparently, he found a quieter model in the Middle East. At some point, he crossed the Red Sea. He followed one of the very dangerous caravan routes. And in the house of a very rich coffee businessman, he first sketched, and then painted a young woman, his daughter, twice. This is an exception. He usually made single sketches. This is twice. Her face and her profile. Now, I might be wrong, but I saw many resemblances with the Statue of Liberty, particularly the hairstyle and the decoration on her head and on her forehead. But we can talk about this later. There is another aspect that really attracted Bartholdi while he was in Egypt, the funerary statues. Bartholdi was shocked by the impression that the funerary statues made on him. And this is a typical expression of his theatrical interest. Rather than fantasizing on the past of the funerary statues, Bartholdi thought, how could they still talk to him? And he wanted to know how the Egyptian made this colosseum to last for so long and still speak to humanity. As someone who was very familiar with theater, he started to look at the appearances of the statue. And first he said they are colossal. And being colossal, they want to suggest that they are placed above humanity. Now, today I looked at the Statue of Liberty from the One World Trade Center, and she was so small. So maybe at some point, Bartholdi's plan for making the Statue of Liberty the only thing surviving from our world, talking to future worlds, will be frustrated. But at his time, the Egyptian statues were real colossi, and he wanted to build a colossus himself. The second reason said it's their expression. If you look at this statue's expression, you will notice that it's kind, certainly kinder than the Statue of Liberty. He's almost smiling, but he was particularly struck by their eyes. He said, their gaze is kind and impassible, as if they ignored the present. So he said, the reason of these statues' success is their transcendence. They transcend the present. Now, Bartholdi was not the only one in France obsessed with future. He was a friend of Laboulaye, was a philosopher. He was a friend of many philosophers who visited the atelier of a riche affair. Lamennais, I could mention many of them. According to these people, France had to become what she was no longer, a powerful country in Europe. There was one narrative of future power that intrigued artists like Bartholdi more than others, and this narrative goes back to the Comte of Saint-Simon. As you know, he thought of a global community, hopefully guided by France and Paris, connected by technological innovation, scientific inventions. This was the world of the future. It was a global world, Saint-Simon said. And Paris had to be at the core of this world. And the Saint-Simonians imagined Paris like a marching man. His feet on the Channel, his head on the Mediterranean, on his breast, a colossus, a colossal temple made shaped like a woman, with a sphere, a globe under her left arm, and a spare on her right hand, a lighthouse. Of course, lighthouses are usually on the sea, but Paris had to be a maritime city, and so she needed a lighthouse. Now, there are no documents proving that Bartholdi was aware of this specific Saint-Simonian project, but he was certainly familiar with Saint-Simonianism in general, particularly after he went back to Egypt. Bartholdi went back to Egypt in 1869. This time there was no longer Jérôme working hard to get photographs of naked women to paint himself later. This time there was another nice Frenchman. This was Ferdinand de Lesseps. Now, Ferdinand de Lesseps was an engineer, and at the time he was starting the construction of the Suez Canal, which the Saint-Simonians saw as a sort of metaphorical continuation of the arms of their anthropomorphic Paris, stretching through the Mediterranean, reaching out towards India and China. Bartholdi was awestruck. Lesseps was not too kind with Bartholdi. He didn't like this young, ambitious man who came here and wanted to find projects for himself. So he was suspicious. Nonetheless, he took him to the Suez Canal. He showed him all the site works around the channel and invited him to dinner. The dinner was incredible. Bartholdi got to know that what was then called the Lesseps Boutique was a series of shops selling French jewelry, preparing French caviar, which was sent fresh from Paris every day. So basically, Lesseps had built his own court around the Nile. Bartholdi, who was very naive, thought that he could fit into this court. He was wrong. So to his mother, Charlotte, who was Bartholdi's confidant, he drew a little sketch of what he saw on the Suez Canal, machines, elevators. He was really a Saint-Simonian at the time, Bartholdi. He said, these elevators are magnificent. He imagined Suez, like the city of the future, the Red Sea crossed by very fast ships, tall buildings everywhere, machines. He was very excited. But he was an Orientalist. You shouldn't forget about that. And like all Orientalists, he despised the Orient. He liked technological innovations coming from the West, of course. But the East in itself was erotic, was confused, was dirty. And he was not particularly kind either. He said, we Europeans are autocratic with the local people. Of course, he said to his mother, I entered everywhere and hit all those who gave the impression of not understanding me. Of course, Bartholdi, can you imagine Bartholdi, the maker of the peaceful Statue of Liberty, hitting people because they didn't understand him? But he did. And he decided to build something. There was no project for a lighthouse there. And he knew that the Pasha had much money there. Certainly, Lesseps had much money. So he made a maquette, and he also painted an aquarelle. This is a photo he made of a lost aquarelle in 1869 of a woman dressed like a local female farmer, Her breast is naked, is almost naked. There is a very transparent veil on the breast. So I'm sorry the picture is not perfect, but you have to imagine that. And the dress is very oriental. The pose is not too erotic, but this figure is certainly an orientalistic image of a Egyptian woman. But notice the symbols. The symbols are not orientalistic at all. The symbols are general. There is a torch, the symbol of progress. There is light, the symbol of enlightenment. And Bartholdi had applied, therefore, the lesson he had learned in Egypt. A statue which is prepared for the future, for a global future, has to be related to objects which are very general. Sadly enough, the project could not be accepted. Lesseps was indeed jealous of him. The Pasha didn't have money, so Bartholdi was left empty-handed. But he had two things playing in his favor. First of all, as I said, the icon was general enough to be applied somewhere else. Second, his friend Laboulaye was one of the few Frenchmen who sided with the North during the American Civil War. So in 1865, at the end of the war, Lesseps found himself inside a huge network of French-American intellectuals, businessmen, magnates, who not only shared his liberal convictions, they also shared a project of uniting French and American forces to limit British power, particularly in the financial and commercial domain. So, at some point, Laboulaye proposed Bartholdi to move his project. Now, Bartholdi admitted that this happened, but in a slightly subtle and not really sincere way. In 1885, 1 year before the inauguration, he wrote an interview for the Americans. He gave an interview to the North Atlantic, and he said, in 1865, Laboulaye invited me to his villa and suggested that a statue might be erected to commemorate the friendship between French and Americans. I had other things to do, he didn't say what. So nothing was done. Well, very possibly there is no document confirming this hypothesis, no document. The only document we have, however, suggests that Laboulaye and Bartholdi started working at his model, the Egyptian model, after 1865, between 1869 and 1871. Indeed, the document is a letter that Bartholdi wrote to his mother in 1870 and said, I see that you think the same principles cannot be applied in the two hemispheres. Clearly, he thought the contrary was true. Now, Charlotte Laboulaye, who would have loved my PowerPoint presentation, so consider this flowery PowerPoint presentation as an homage to Charlotte, was a sponsor of Bartholdi. So she gave money to Bartholdi. She was a very rich woman. Her husband, Bartholdi's father, died when he was only 2. Instead of remarrying, she became a father for him. A father and a mother at the same time. She was very, very strict. And she didn't want Bartholdi to leave. The other son he had was in a mental asylum. So basically, Bartholdi was the only son. And she didn't want him to go away to America. So she said, I don't want this. But Bartholdi, as usual with his mother, neglected what she said and continued working at his project. As you can see, the first thing he did was continue shaping the Egyptian models. The first 2 models on the right are still Egyptians in characters. The universal symbols continue to be there, the torch and probably the light at night. We don't know because we don't have aquarelles of these models. But he added something in her right hand, a broken vase. Now, the broken vase is a symbol of liberty. It could be applied to the East, where allegedly the innovations from France freed the local farmers from their corvée. It could be also applied in America, where the Civil War formally broke the chains of slavery. And I'm talking about chains because the next step taken by Bartholdi was to make a third Egyptian model, this time keeping the vase in a hand and adding some chains at her feet. One step forward, and the statue has a Roman dress, the vase in her hand, and the chains at her feet. Both projects show that Bartholdi was debating between, he was probably taking into consideration the two options, vase or chains. Which one of the two was easier to fit in America? His reflections were stopped when France was occupied by Germany. This is an aquarelle by Bartholdi, who went to Colmar to reach his mother and protect his town. He saw the Germans enter in Colmar, sleep in his mattresses, drink his wine. Colmar became German. Then he went to Bordeaux, where the provisional government had moved with a spectacular hot air balloon flight, and Gambetta, the Minister of Interior, sent him back to the east, where Bartholdi fought under the command of Garibaldi. The French army was very suspicious of Garibaldi, and they boycotted his army. So basically, they did not have weapons, they didn't have clothing. Bartholdi started to go everywhere around France, to Brest, to Bordeaux. He was trying to find weapons and clothing and men for the army of Garibaldi, whom he loved like a father. At some point, he found the American ship, Lafayette, loaded with men and weapons. He talked to the sailors on board, took the weapons and brought them to Garibaldi. Alas, France lost the war. Lorraine and Alsace went to the Germans. Bartholdi said to one of his best friends, the American poet Longfellow, "I am an exile in my own country. I have to show my passport to go back to my mother in Colmar." And he did what exiles normally do. He went to America. He did something else, either before leaving for America or when he came back. He replaced the vase with the Declaration of Independence. Now, the advantage of the Declaration of Independence is that if you see it from far away, it could be a book, a general symbol of enlightenment. It could be confused with the Bible or Quran or whatever you want. The Declaration of Independence in itself, though, was a symbol that anchored the statue to some historical episode. So where is the lesson about future gone? Where did the lesson about globalism go? If Bartholdi really wanted his statue to be a global symbol, why attaching it to the Declaration of Independence, which signaled a very specific moment in American history, the moment of freedom from the British? Why hiding the chains of the American Revolution, of the American Civil War underground? There are people today who don't know about the chains. So it is my conviction that the Declaration of Independence is a very futuristic symbol of the statue. It's the reason why minorities love the statue. It's the reason why the statue will continue to be a futuristic monument, a monument speaking to young generation more than old generation for the rest of her life. As Frederick Douglass said, the Declaration of Independence is a very ring bolt in the chain of our yet undeveloped destiny. This means the Declaration of Independence is not a document of justice, it's a promise of justice. It's a very symbol, the margin Harry James talked about. Is the gap between what we have is not the Constitution, it's the Declaration of Independence, it's a series of rights that the Constitution has not assimilated yet. And the statue is a reminder that there is something to do to make justice. We are not done, and the statue is there to remind us of that. But was this something that Bartholdi and Laboulaye knew, or not? Certainly we could say that Laboulaye put the Declaration of Independence in the hand of the Statue of Liberty to remind a humiliating defeat inflicted to Britain, right? Because this is what he wanted. He wanted to limit the monopoly of England. So the Declaration of Independence is fantastic. It was a way to provoke England. And what about Bartholdi? Bartholdi had lost Alsace to the Germans. The Declaration of Independence is a list of individual rights, but it's also a document used globally to defend nations, national liberty. And another question, is a promise of justice in itself, a peaceful concept, or is the promise of justice always carrying with it the idea of compensation and vengeance? Certainly in the case of those who built the statue, it carried with it a powerful sense of vengeance and compensation. These people were angry when they built the statue and gave it to America. Why was Bartholdi angry? Well, Bartholdi, after losing Garibaldi, went back to his home, identified himself completely with Léon Gambetta, the former Minister of Interior. He remembered that Gambetta encouraged the Republicans to unite around patriotic thoughts of revenge, and I underline the word revenge, that will be the protest of force and justice against force and infamy. Well, when I see the Statue of Liberty, I think of Gambetta and these words. Do you want to have a taste of what Bartholdi was busy at while trying to sell the Statue of Liberty to Americans? Well, look at this, The Curse of Assas, 1871. Here you can see a mother who doesn't have sweet eyes. Indeed, the Assas has a threatening arm outstretched in front of her, threatening the Germans who had killed her father, and while she has a kid to take care of, a kid embracing her hips. This is a Curse of Assas, 1871. Then, what about this? A monument Vulminant. My son, who has a morbid sense of art, really loved this place when I brought him to Colmar. This is in the public cemetery of Colmar, and was built by Bartholdi after 3 young soldiers were killed by the Germans in their advance, in their attack to Colmar in 1870. There is an arm of a resurrecting soldier, of course, stretching out and reaching for a sword with which to inflict the last throw against the enemy. 1872. Interestingly enough, Bartholdi had an idea before building the actual monument. I don't know if you can see here, but the arm is uplifted, exactly like the arms of the Statue of Liberty, and he's holding a sword. Looking very much alike this guy here, Vercingetorix. Bartholdi built this monument for Clermont-Ferrand, and you can see the Gaul chief charging, galloping on the body of a dead Roman with outstretched arm and uplifted arm and a sword, and grabbing a sword. And what about this one? The Léon de Belfort, 1872, he started building 1872, is a brick lion standing on the fort, the military fort, in which the Alsatians resisted successfully this time the German attack. This lion has been mortally wounded and is ready to strike again. Resurrected, maybe, finding the last force to inflict a blow against the Germans. So, Bartholdi was not at peace when he built the Statue of Liberty, of course. But not even Laboulaye was at peace when he built the Statue of Liberty. He had a sense of vengeance against the British, of course. And there is an anecdote I would like to tell you. This anecdote, it's true, came from Lafayette. You know, Lafayette was a good friend of Washington. He went to America to fight against the British. When he came back, he told various anecdotes. And Laboulaye was particularly fond of this one. Washington was reviewing his crews and ships in Rhode Island, and Lafayette was with him. Then Washington got tired and decided to go home. On the way home, in each city he entered, in each village he entered, a long line of children, holding torches in their hands, welcomed him. In one village, Washington stepped down the horse, approached the kids, and said, "Future is dark, kids. I'm not sure we will make it. If we don't, these children will avenge us." Now, there is a sense in which making a statue for the future means making a statue for future generation as well, making a statue for the kids. So it has been discussed, is a statue a man or a woman? You know, people say the statue really resembles a man. I don't totally disagree, but does anybody ever ask, is a statue is a young person or old person? Because of course, if you want to construct a statue that constantly speaks to future generations, you have to make it young or able to speak to young people. Well, almost at the end of his life, Bartholdi was invited to his former high school, Lycée Louis Le Grand in Paris. He was a terrible student when he was young. And Charlotte was really worried because he wouldn't study, but you know, the more one gets older, the more, you know, the wiser. So he went to the students and he said, you have to study, you have to be good, you have to make your homework. But then he concluded with a phrase that I think it's enlightening. The experience of the old, he said, is not a motto. It is only a lamppost, warning against dangers. The light that illuminates the long path ahead is you, youth, who are holding its torch. It is you who are to illumine the future and its obscurities. Clearly, Bartholdi was addressing the young when he built the statue. She shed some light around. She can be a mother. She's certainly not a mother alone. Her light, her torch, is the torch of the youth. I found particularly appropriate that the lady who protested against the mistreatment of children at the Mexican borders climbed on top of the statue and crouched on her like a little child among the folds of her mother's tunic. Because I think the statue is the protector of children, if not a child itself. So I would say the Statue of Liberty, for me, but we can discuss this, is a symbol of younger generation seeking justice in behalf or sometimes against past generation. She's not a mother welcoming the wretched from Europe. She's a son or the daughter, she's a son or a daughter promising justice to them, or indeed to us all in the future. Thank you.
Very much. With his trips to the East in Orientalism, to what extent was he influenced by the occult and occult knowledge and transferring that symbolism into the art?
Do you want me to respond, to answer every question? Do you want me to? Yeah. So it's interesting because you know, Orientalism is said to provide images that encapsulate and imprison the East in a way. So I thought very interesting that Bartholdi could use an Orientalist image to represent the West, to the point that the West itself saw itself reflected in that image. So I think Bartholdi was not into the Orientalist cult. I think he was in the Saint-Simonian one, in the sense that he saw the world as global and dominated by Western powers. I think he thought that America was a colony as much as Suez. When he went to America, he thought that it was dirty, that the architecture in New York was a strange and not particularly pleasant conglomeration of different styles that left him, puzzled. So I think, America for Bartholdi and Laboulaye was a new colony of France. They wanted to regain this colony they had lost to the British after the 7 Years' War. So in this sense, the same Orientalistic or Saint-Simonian ideology applied to build the statue in the East was perfect for the West, because the West was a colony. So no big change was required.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the talk. I'm a little bit curious also about the material history of the statue, about where possibly the metal might have come from, or any of the stories about how it was actually put together.
Yeah.
And I'm also curious about your next project on Federalists, so maybe you could just give a few sentences about that.
Yeah.
Microphone on. You can't. You have the direction.
Okay.
The answer is no.
Thank you. So, thank you for the question. I wrote my book, my interest in the statue was essentially prompted by your question 9 years ago. So I wanted to know more about the materials. So the iron, nobody ever wondered about the iron, and I am for the pro-iron group. I wanted to know where this iron come from. And the answer was easy, because the French had mines in Anzin, which was the same mines that provided iron for the railroads. Interestingly enough, the same people who financed railroads also financed the Palais de l'Opéra, le Palais Garnier in Paris. So there is the Palais Garnier is a sort of sibling of the Statue of Liberty. And indeed, if you look at the figures standing on the roof of the Palais Garnier, they were made in the same factory from which the statue comes from. They were made with the same material and the same techniques. So in my book, I've told in detail this story. The story about copper is more, even I think, more interesting, because there are no documents surviving that can demonstrate, that can help you reconstruct a final history. But if you follow the history of copper from the mines to the statue, you also understand why Laboulaye and Bartholdi thought of America as the future colony. The first block of copper came from French mines in Michigan. So the old French possession in Michigan still had people, French people living there. And they had mines, the Clark mines, and they provided the most important load of the first and most important load of copper. Now, this copper was subsequently processed in the factories of Secretan, who was an officially secret donor. He didn't want to reveal his name. He was the one who provided copper for all the factories making ships, transatlantic ships, but also cartridges and weapons for the army. And then another part came from Norway. And this is more interesting, I think, because the group controlling Norwegian mines at the time was French, and it was later Paribas group. At the time, it was controlled by the French-Italian banker Czernuski, who was in contact with Norway. So you can reconstruct part of this story by following financial networks. Also, many of the bankers who made this possible were Catholics. The myth that the Statue of Liberty was made by rich Jews is simply wrong. And the fact that Emma Lazarus wrote a poem, she was Jewish, doesn't have any relation with the origin of money. Actually, it was a nationalistic Catholic group of bankers who control the funding of the statue. The statue was not the people's statue. Both in America and in France, the statue came from bigger conglomerates, big people, big money. Yeah, and on the last project, I found a parallelism between working on the Statue of Liberty and working on the American Federation. I think that John Adams was right when he said that maybe American history is shorter than European history, but it's a story of humanity itself. Studying America means studying humanity, really. I mean, it means studying China, Japan, the world itself. came to America, and the making of America involved the whole world. So for me, it's a challenge, but it's also an interesting project to see how America, that the construction was America, was not an American phenomenon, it was a global phenomenon. Oh.
So I wonder if Bartholdi was alive and able to comment and react to the words of Emma Lazarus.
So Bartholdi probably met Emma Lazarus because she was involved in the project for advertising the statue in America. So she wrote this poem along with other poets when Bartholdi was in America and was alive. We don't have any direct documents which he left to say what he thought about this myth. I would say other people were trying to connect the statue with these motherly figures of hope and welcome. He was not particularly interested, but he was not even against it. Although no surviving documents ever proved that Bartholdi was really cared for the problem of immigration at the time, which was not, of course, it just started. So it's difficult to say. Yeah.
Would you please address some of the models who posed for the statue, or some of the women that might have inspired her face and her body?
Yeah. So the most famous one, the widespread myth is that the mother of Bartholdi, Charlotte, inspired the face of the statue. There is another recent book by Nathalie Salmon, who said that her great-grandmother inspired the Statue of Liberty. I talked about this in the book. This woman was a wife of rich makers of shirts in America. He was of French origins. She was a strange woman. She was born in California from a single mother. She was a single mother herself, and she went to Paris along with this man who was not her husband yet. So I would be so tempted to say she is the one, because she was a tough woman. But the documents at our disposal are only oral. So it's difficult to say if this is right or this is wrong. There is one document which I think solved the problems forever, and it's Bartholdi himself who says to his friend, I always put many faces I know in a statue. And this is true. All Bartholdi statues are inspired either by himself or by his brother or by his friends. So he loved to incorporate some traits of personal history into his document. You know, medieval artists used to sign their documents not with a signature, but by inserting a little detail that reminded their friends that they were the author. Bartholdi did the same. All his, I don't want to sound like Da Vinci Code, but you know, every single work he does has some recognizable character and item. And in the Statue of Liberty, if you're interested to know which one they are, except for, you know, it could be the face that reminds himself, his brother, his mother, but it's the star on her head. So, you know, the star on the statue's head has been interpreted correctly as well as the symbol of the rising sun of America. Well, you know, the statue has a crown as well under this rays, and Bartholdi often talked of the sunset of the French monarchy. The French monarchy gave money and men to America to win the war against Britain. And La Boulaye was very, very grateful for France. So you could make the statement that the Statue of Liberty in the morning, when the sun is rising, represents the rising Republic of America, but at sunset, she reminds the dying monarchy of France. So she's not necessarily a Republican symbol. Also, the star is a Morgenstern. The Morgenstern is a symbol of Colmar. The Statue of Liberty is bearing the symbol of Colmar on her head. Colmar has a Morgenstern, which looks like a shooting star. But it was the old medieval weapon which was used to fight against enemy, a ball with lots of points. The statue is crowned by the sun. The sun was a symbol of the Bartholdi's family. They had a pharmacy in Colmar. There is no longer, but they had a pharmacy, and the symbol of the pharmacy, which is a golden sun, still hangs from the wall in Bartholdi Museum, which was Bartholdi's house in Colmar. So I invited you to go there. It's a beautiful museum, and they're very, very welcoming, and it gives you an idea of where, you know, the place from which the statue comes, which is really a little region in France at the border with Germany. Yes.
Other questions?
Why were you drawn to this work? And do you see this especially as a symbol of feminism for America?
Not Bartholdi and not even Laboulaye were feminists. But as I said before, the Declaration of Independence makes the Statue of Liberty, makes a symbol of her appealing to minorities, all kinds of minorities. I mean, if you think your rights are not respected, the Statue of Liberty becomes your interlocutor automatically, because she's saying, look, there are rights that are not in the Constitution yet. So she becomes a feminist icon in the moment in which feminists are dressing her and looking at her torch and her declaration as symbols of what they're still expecting to have.
Why does this work appeal to you?
Sorry?
Why does this topic appeal to you?
Why does this appeal to me?
What drew you to the work?
Sorry?
What drew you to the work? Why this book? What drew you to the work?
Why this book? Well, I was particularly bored by my previous project. So that might be a reason. And the second, I would say, you know, I'm Italian, of Italian origins, and so I tried to find, I got interested in the symbol of immigration here, but I don't think so. I don't think it was that. I think it was the idea of an icon moved from one place to the other. I think the Suez part really intrigued me. And also when I found this previously unknown letter of Bartholdi saying, you clearly don't, you don't agree, mother, with the fact that I can work on two different hemispheres using the same principle. That I found interesting, because Orientalists used only to work on one part of the hemisphere and say, naked women, confusion, this is the East. How is it possible that someone works in the East and then says, yes, I can move this in the West? So either he considers America as a colony, which I think is the case. Many European travelers went to America as if they were going to Africa at that time, prepared for the worst. Or we are dealing with something completely different. So there was, at the time, someone thinking that the same principles could be applied globally. If this is the case, then the Statue of Liberty can be the beginning of a new trend of research.
How do you think the myth of the statue being a welcoming symbol arose? Since we've grown up with that in our thoughts, and you're saying that really was not the original motivation.
Yeah, so I think these things are distinct. So on the one side, the statue, because of the declaration, because of the theatrical effects with which it was constructed, had an immediate appealing on the minorities. And the second thing, I think, the people who advertised the statue in America in order to get the money to build the pedestal wrote in the newspapers, this is the statues, the people's statues. And interestingly, they painted cartoons of the statue in which the statue had a rosy face. She looked very much like Columbia. But the Statue of Liberty was never this rosy figure, never. But yes, of course, I think.
And actually, it just occurred to me that it was erected just at the time when this great immigration
started. Yes, and I think part was the journalistic propaganda, part is an appeal that the Statue of Liberty, maybe because of the position, has on people at large, but minorities in particular. So this is something we can still investigate. I think the book is not finished, not because I am promising you a sequel which won't come, but I think is really something that people will continue writing about, and they eventually will find a solution and a reason. And maybe they will find that everything I've written is wrong, but good. I mean, yeah, I think minorities are attracted to her, and the Declaration of Independence, I think, it was a bomb the French put in American arms when they delivered the statue, really. Because Cleveland and other established people continue saying, the statue is a ward and watch of America, this is a symbol of what we have, and she doesn't allow people in America if they don't follow our ideals. And the minorities were saying, absolutely not. This is a promise of future justice. So, in the book, I've also talked about the religious models that emerge from the statue like a Madonna. And so I think many people saw a kind of religious figures in her as well. And they were drawn to her because they saw a kind of Madonna with, yeah. No, you're welcome. Thank you for the question.
Why did they build stairs inside? And did they really intend everyone to be climbing all those stairs so many years later?
Yes, they did.
And is it true that originally you could climb up to the torch?
Yes, it is true. So, the model of the statue, so the statue, yes, was meant to be climbed inside. The model, as you probably know, is San Carlo Borromeo in Italy. The part of Bartholdi's family came from Italy, from the city of Como, and they were Protestants, so they had to leave. And Bartholdi would come back to Como and looked at these statues. In general, he was a disciple of Viollet le Duc, as you know, he was a very important artist who rediscovered medieval art and Renaissance art in 19th century Paris. So they were interested in this kind of copper technique of copper worked with the hammer, repoussé is the name in French. This technique was used for jewelry. So you can see the statue as a huge jewel, the huge clock or jewel, really, because this was a technique used in Renaissance and medieval times to make jewels. Bartholdi learned from this factory from which also statues of the opera, but smaller, came, and so he tried to apply this to a huge scale, and the stairs were necessary. But in the statue of San Carlone, the stairs were inside a structure made of bricks. Bartholdi was the first one to make the structure in iron and copper repoussé. Yes. So a very last question you said about the second question was, it was very interesting. That? Yes, so the torch, you could climb to the torch, and actually during on the day of the inauguration, a lady climbed to the torch and then out. During World War II, a German attack in a close-by factory shaked the statue, and the torch was misplaced, was moved, and so from then on, it was no longer possible to climb to the torch because it was no longer safe. So that was the first strike against the statue, and it was by the Germans. The Germans also had a personal revenge against Bartholdi. All the statues Bartholdi erected in his own city of Colmar were torn down by the Germans during World War II. World War I, yeah.
Could I?
Yes.
Is it true that it was Eiffel who designed the interior iron structure of the statue, and did he leave any record of what he thought of
the Statue of Liberty and the ideas behind it.
Sorry, could you please come closer because it's
I'm sorry. My understanding is that Gustav Eiffel designed the interior structure of the statue, the ironwork. Is that correct? First, and secondly, did he write anything about what he thought of the mission of this statue was?
Eiffel or Bartholdi?
Eiffel.
Ah, okay. So Gustave Eiffel never directly worked as a statue. He put someone else at work. He was an Alsatian. He was an Alsatian mathematician who just came into his firm, and he worked at Eiffel, but using the technique that Eiffel had used to build the Maria Pia Bridge and other structures. So the pylon from Eiffel's bridge was adapted to the Statue of Liberty. But if you see the Statue of Liberty without her cover, she's a pylon of a bridge. Eiffel did not leave anything written about the meaning of the statue. But as you see, and I mean, the Tour Eiffel was his way of striking back, of course, because, but he was not personally involved, no.
If it wasn't meant to welcome the immigrants to America, then why does she face out into the bay and the ocean and not facing Manhattan?
Yes, so first of all, for aesthetical reasons. I mean, a lighthouse is meant for the ships that come, not for the ships that go. And second, you know, there are many things to look towards in Europe. There is England, which for La Boulaye was the enemy, you know, and for La Boulaye it was France. It was his home, the power that will finally arrive in America and take her vengeance against Britain. But there were people who believed that the Statue of Liberty also welcomed people. Certainly, La Boulaye and Bartholdi did not have that priority. But people in America were trying to make their own, they were trying to take possession, poor things, of the Statue of Liberty. I mean, after all, it was theirs. And so immigration became a big thing for Americans themselves. But it was not the factor that led Bartholdi and La Boulaye to give a certain expressions or certain symbols to the statue. So Saint-Simonian globalism, industrialization, vengeance against enemies was certainly the thing that left a mark on a face, which is very hard and severe, is not welcoming.
Question?
I heard that La Boulaye was also expressing resistance to Napoleon Napoleon III.
Yes, it's true. So Napoleon III was, well, it's you know, La Boulaye was, first of all, he wrote fables for children. I don't know if you know this, he wrote fables. Every Christmas, French families gather around the fireplace to read La Boulaye's fables aloud. There were fables from all over the world, and this was a very global aspect, which we will find again in the statue. And many of these fables were meant to teach children the common origins of, or the common core of religions. There is a very famous fable about Adam and Eve in the Muslim tradition, which re-elaborates and I think left a mark on the statue as well. But Napoleon III was actually sent La Boulaye away in exile. La Boulaye had to stop teaching during the Third Empire. He went to Switzerland. And he wrote a fable entitled King Poodle, making fun of Napoleon III. And it was a glorification of democracy against tyranny and despotism. Yeah.
Oh yes, my question is, I'm sorry, do you want a question? I will give it to you.
The woman who recently climbed the statue
yes.
left a sticker under her heel that said, "Abolish ICE." And I don't think immigration realized that. But anyway, After it was erected, did the French citizens feel that it was had a special meaning for them and maybe welcoming for them, or did they feel some connection to her?
Yeah, so my book is not about the future reception of the Statue of Liberty, but this is something I could write for to continue the book. I was always tempted to see how the statue, what is the story of the statue after she was constructed there, because I think that would be a great book. Writing about all the modifications, the fact that she was left undisturbed and neglected by Americans until World War I. Basically. And there were stories about, told by sailors who went there and heard strange noises and, sounds of chains and all things like that. It would be very much fun, I think, writing a book about this. But certainly it would be interesting to see what the French had to say about the Statue of Liberty. We know, for example, that the Statue of Liberty was cloned everywhere, and in France as well. Bordeaux has her own Statue of Liberty. So why did they do that? So that's a very interesting question. I can't answer right now, but I probably will in 10 years again. But something I wanted to say is that the clonation of the statue might have an origin in the way in which Bartholdi learned to paint. So Henri Scheffer, the painter, the Bartholdi's master back in the 40s and 50s, was a painter, but he did not paint all his paintings. He painted the hands and the faces. All the rest was painted by his disciples, including Bartholdi sometimes, and he was one of the first to introduce photography in his atelier in order to make many copies of his paintings to sell to America and to the rest of the world. So he was really the one who taught Bartholdi the art of cloning works of art. He did so with photography, and Jérôme was one who really exploited the art of photography to make copies and to sell them around the world. There are so many copies of Jérôme's paintings sold in America. And sometimes little details of Jérôme's paintings were transformed into statues. Now the funds to build the statue were mainly gathered from magnates and rich people, but also from replica, the art of sending replica of the statues. So, there is this myth that Romanticism is about unicity, exclusivity, but it's not true. As the story of Bartholdi shows you, the Romanticism was also about making money with art, and Bartholdi was certainly proof of this.
Yes, since you did research about Saint-Simonian anthropomorphic idea of Paris, my question is a little bit indirect. Have there been any other attempt of other people to create something? Are there any material vestiges of this idea?
Of artists, okay. That's an interesting question. I would say more in paintings than sculpture. So, for example, Henri Scheffer himself, he was a good friend of Saint-Simonians who often came to his atelier, and he would paint huge paintings. He had this idea of Bartholdi that huge art was placed above humanity, and he had the Saint-Simonian ideas of globalism, which he resolved with a very religious twist. So, for example, the Christus Remunerator I showed you showed Christ in the middle of the scene with around people from all over the world. So sometimes I thought of the statue as a semi-religious figure. It could be a Madonna, it could be a Christ. The gender doesn't matter very much. But all around Bartholdi imagined people coming from different parts of the world, as in the paintings he saw in Scheffer's atelier. So I am more informed about the paintings applications of the Saint-Simonian idea, but I'm sure there might be sculptural renditions as well.
I think we have time for one more question. Was there a hand over here before? Oh, at the end? Okay.
How do you think he decided, Bertolli, to use the right hand ultimately for the Statue of Liberty when the models and also the Egyptian photograph had the left arm with the torch? Thank you.
Well, you know, he changed the position a lot. So the Statue of Liberty is straight, is only slightly rotated. All the other figures were softer, and there was movement in their hips and their shoulders. So I think the decision to put the torch in that hand was not dictated by by certain symbolism, but rather by aesthetical reasons, which is interesting though, because in the end, he portrayed the Statue of Liberty in a much more severe shape than Eastern sibling. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
If I look straight down the nose, there she is. I take the Brussels off the bed and every side straight down. I can see more down. Yeah. Cheers. It's very interesting. I mean, you don't see her face. It's like getting and the cemetery and that's the cemetery. So they say, yes, I thoroughly enjoy seeing her. Yes. Opinion of the day. Really interesting. Wonderful.
Oh, yes.
It's an important one, and it's fairly early. It's like it's 1915. Any language here, so that the immigrants could understand it and then contribute to the war effort. So it was about food progressive revolutionary statements. But there's no. It was about colonies and empire. It wasn't about republicanism.
Are you familiar with the sexy Statue of Liberty in Las Vegas?